They terminated me for non-essential role, then found out I controlled the server access. The coffee machine in the break room had been broken for 3 weeks. Not actually broken, just displaying an error code that nobody else could decipher. I fixed it in 2 minutes on my first day back from vacation, the same way I'd been fixing everything else at Zenith Dynamics for the past 7 years. Jasmine's magic touch, Brad from marketing joked, grabbing his latte. He said it the same way you'd compliment a pet for doing a simple trick. I smiled and nodded, just like I always did. That was my role here, the quiet black girl who made technology behave. Need your password reset? Call Jasmine. Server acting up? Find Jasmine. Can't access the client portal that somehow runs our entire multi-million-dollar operation? Don't worry, Jasmine will handle it. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just handling it. I was it. I settled into my corner desk, the one by the window that nobody wanted because it caught the afternoon glare, and opened my laptop. 3 instant messages were already waiting. Sarah from HR couldn't log into payroll. The new intern had somehow locked himself out of his email. And Marcus from legal needed emergency access to a case file before his 10 a.m. meeting. My fingers moved across the keyboard like a pianist playing a familiar concerto. Database query here, permission adjustment there, a quick server restart that nobody would even notice. Within 15 minutes, 3 people's days were saved, and I'd probably prevented at least one minor corporate crisis. You're a lifesaver, Marcus texted back. If only he knew how literally true that was. I leaned back in my chair and let my eyes drift to the framed photo on my desk, me at my college graduation, flanked by my parents. Mom had been so proud when I landed this job straight out of Georgia Tech, information systems specialist at a Fortune 500 company. She'd brag to anyone who'd listen. What she didn't know was that within my first year, I'd quietly rewritten half their legacy code. Within 2 years, I'd architected a custom integration system that saved them millions in licensing fees. By year 3, I was essentially running the technological backbone of a company that employed over 2,000 people. But my title never changed. My salary barely kept pace with inflation. And in every meeting where they discussed digital transformation and systems optimization, I sat in the back corner, invisible, while consultants earning 10 times my salary presented strategies I'd already implemented months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd watched 3 different chief technology officers come and go, each one taking credit for the robust infrastructure and seamless digital ecosystem they'd inherited. During the Henderson acquisition 2 years ago, when they needed to merge 2 completely incompatible systems in 3 weeks or lose a $50 million deal, guess who worked 18-hour days to make it happen? The consultant they hired charged them $200,000 for a comprehensive integration strategy. I implemented the actual solution for my regular $65,000 salary and a pizza party. Jasmine, can you come to conference room B? I looked up to see Kelly from HR standing by my desk, her expression carefully neutral in that way that meant either very good news or very bad news. Given that it was a Tuesday morning and she was wearing her difficult conversation blazer, I suspected the latter. Sure thing, I said, saving my work and closing my laptop. As I walked past the cubicles toward the conference room, I caught snippets of conversation about the quarterly numbers, the new client onboarding system, and somebody's weekend plans. Conference room B was the smallest meeting room, the one they used for performance reviews and terminations. The blinds were drawn, and I could see 2 figures sitting at the table through the frosted glass. Kelly opened the door and gestured for me to sit. Across from me sat Richard Henley, my direct supervisor for the past 3 years. He was the kind of manager who took credit for successes and delegated blame for failures. Next to him was someone I didn't recognize, a thin woman in an expensive suit with a tablet in front of her. Jasmine, thank you for joining us, Richard began, not quite meeting my eyes. This is Patricia Wells from Corporate Restructuring. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned years ago not to show emotion in corporate settings. It was always used against you later. As you know, we've been conducting a comprehensive review of all departmental roles, Patricia said, consulting her tablet. In an effort to streamline operations and eliminate redundancy, We've made the difficult decision to restructure several positions. The corporate speak was thick enough to cut with a knife, but the message was clear. Your position has been classified as non-essential to core operations, Richard added, finally looking at me. We'll be transitioning your responsibilities to our managed IT services provider. Non-essential. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I nodded slowly and asked, when? Today will be your last day, Patricia said. We're prepared to offer a standard severance package, 2 weeks' salary plus accrued vacation time. Of course, I said quietly. I'll need about an hour to document my current projects and transfer any critical access codes. Actually, Richard interrupted, we'll handle the transition internally. We just need you to return your badge and laptop. They thought I was going to cry. I could see it in their faces, that mixture of pity and discomfort that people wear when they think they're about to witness an emotional breakdown. The quiet black girl who'd never pushed back, never demanded recognition, never caused problems. She'd just pack up her desk and disappear. I stood up and extended my hand to Patricia. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to Zenith's success. I hope the transition goes smoothly. The handshake seemed to surprise her. Richard looked almost disappointed. I'll clean out my desk now, I said, walking toward the door. As I packed my few personal items into a small cardboard box, I could feel eyes on me from around the office. Word travels fast in corporate environments. By now, everyone knew that Jasmine was being let go. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed relieved that it wasn't them. I handed my badge and laptop to Kelly at the front desk. All set, I said cheerfully. I'm really sorry, Jasmine, she whispered. This is such bullshit. I smiled and shrugged. These things happen. Take care of yourself, Kelly. As I walked to my car, I felt oddly calm. 7 years of my life, and they dismissed me in a 15-minute meeting. Non-essential. The girl who'd single-handedly prevented their systems from collapsing during 3 major crises, who'd saved them millions in consulting fees, who'd worked weekends and holidays to keep their digital world spinning. I sat in my car for a moment, looking back at the Zenith Dynamics building. 37 floors of glass and steel, housing thousands of people who had no idea how precarious their technological existence really was. Then I drove home, ordered Chinese takeout, and opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I stared at the screen that had become more familiar to me than my own reflection. The Ebenroot admin panel, a system so deeply embedded in Zenith's infrastructure that removing it would be like performing heart surgery with a sledgehammer. They called me non-essential. If only they knew they'd just fired the architect of their entire digital existence. It started 4 years ago, not 3 like I'd been telling myself. Time has a way of blurring when you're working 20-hour days in a windowless server room, surviving on vending machine coffee, and the kind of determination that comes from being constantly underestimated. Zenith was hemorrhaging money. The merger with Clearwater Industries had turned into a technological nightmare that was costing them nearly $1 million a month in downtime, data corruption, and system conflicts. 2 separate IT infrastructures trying to communicate was like forcing a Mac to run Windows 95, theoretically possible, but practically disastrous. The executives had hired Morrison Tech Solutions, a consulting firm with a reputation for impossible integrations. Their lead consultant, a smug guy named Derek who wore $1,000 suits and spoke in tech buzzwords, had spent 3 months producing reports that essentially said, "This can't be done without starting over." I remember the emergency board meeting where they discussed shutting down the entire merger. I was there to provide technical support, which meant sitting in the corner, invisible, ready to answer questions about server capacity or database queries. That's when I heard the CFO say the words that changed everything. We're looking at a complete loss. $40 million down the drain. That night, I went home to my tiny 1-bedroom apartment and couldn't sleep. Not because I was worried about my job. I was too small to matter in their calculations. I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about the problem. 2 incompatible systems, thousands of data points, millions of transactions that needed to flow seamlessly between platforms that were designed by different companies, in different decades, using different programming languages. Morrison Tech said it was impossible because they were thinking like consultants. They wanted to tear everything down and rebuild it from scratch, a solution that would take 18 months and cost more than some countries' GDP. But I wasn't thinking like a consultant. I was thinking like someone who had grown up fixing broken things with whatever was available. Growing up in Detroit, you learn that sometimes the best solution isn't the most elegant one. It's the one that works with what you've got. I started working on it in secret, not because I had to, but because nobody had asked me to. To everyone else, I was just the girl who reset passwords and updated software. They didn't know I'd been programming since I was 12, or that I'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and a minor in systems architecture. The solution came to me at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of breakthrough that hits you like lightning. Instead of trying to make the two systems speak the same language, I'd create a translator. A middleware system that could interpret requests from either platform and translate them in real time. I called it Ebonroot, partly because ebony was my favorite wood, strong, dark, beautiful, and partly because it would be the root system that everything else grew from. A hidden foundation that nobody would see, but everything would depend on. For 6 weeks, I lived in that server room. I'd arrive at work early, stay late, and work through lunch. I told people I was optimizing legacy systems, boring enough that nobody asked questions. Meanwhile, I was building something that would revolutionize how Zenith operated. The beauty of Ebonroot wasn't just its functionality, it was its invisibility. It worked so seamlessly that users never knew it existed. When someone in the New York office accessed a client file that was stored on Clearwater servers in Phoenix, Ebonroot would intercept the request, translate it, authenticate the user, retrieve the data, and deliver it back, all in milliseconds. I registered the system under my personal developer account because I was working on it after hours, using my own equipment and resources. I figured once it was proven successful, I'd transfer the ownership and finally get the recognition I deserved. The system went live on a Monday morning. By Friday, Zenith's integration problems had vanished. The merger was saved. Stock prices soared. The CEO called it a miraculous turnaround. Derek from Morrison Tech took credit for overseeing the implementation of innovative solutions. He got a case study written about him in TechCrunch. The CTO got promoted. The board got bonuses. And I got a performance review that said I was meeting expectations. I never transferred the ownership of Ebonroot. At first, it was an oversight. I was too busy maintaining and improving the system to worry about paperwork. Then it became a point of pride. Then it became insurance. Over the years, Ebonroot evolved. Every system upgrade, every new integration, every security protocol, it all flowed through my architecture. I had administrative access to everything: email servers, payroll systems, client databases, building security, even the executives' calendar systems. They built their empire on my foundation, and they didn't even know my name was on the deed. Now, sitting in my apartment with takeout cooling beside me, I looked at the Ebonroot dashboard. Every green light represented a system running smoothly. Every data stream showed the thousands of transactions flowing through my creation every minute. Tomorrow, they try to replace me with their managed IT provider. They discover that changing a light bulb is easy when you control the power source. But when you don't even know where the electrical panel is located, even the simplest task becomes impossible. I wasn't going to break anything. I was just going to step back and let them see what happened when the invisible architect decided to become visible. I closed the laptop and smiled. They called me non-essential. Tomorrow, we'd find out who was really keeping the lights on. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., same as I had every workday for 7 years. Muscle memory, I guess. For a split second, I forgot I didn't have anywhere to be. Then I remembered yesterday's meeting, Richard's uncomfortable fidgeting, Patricia's corporate speak dismissal, and I smiled. Coffee tasted better when you weren't rushing to get to a job that didn't appreciate you. I spent the morning doing something I hadn't done in years. Nothing. I read a book. I went for a walk. I called my mom and actually had time to listen to her tell me about the church gossip and her neighbor's new puppy. Simple pleasures that I'd forgotten existed. Around noon, my phone started buzzing. First text. Hey Jay, Weird question, but do you know why I can't access my email? Kelly. Second text. System's acting weird today. Everything's super slow. Marcus. Third text. Are you getting these error messages too? Sarah. I turned my phone face down and made myself a sandwich. They'd figure it out eventually. Or they wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. By 2 p.m., I was curious enough to check my personal email. 17 messages from former colleagues, all asking about various system issues. The managed IT provider had apparently sent someone on site, but according to Brad from marketing, the guy keeps saying everything looks normal, but nothing's working right. That made me laugh. Of course, everything looked normal. Eben Root was designed to be invisible. The authentication delays, the email slowdowns, the random password resets, none of it would show up in standard diagnostic tools. It was like trying to diagnose a migraine with an X-ray. Around 4 p.m., I decided to take a drive. Not to Zenith. I wasn't that petty. But I did drive past the building just out of curiosity. The parking lot was fuller than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. Cars that should have left by 3 p.m. were still there. Through the windows, I could see people clustered around computers, gesturing frantically. The IT provider's van was parked right in front of the main entrance. I parked across the street at a coffee shop and ordered a latte. From my seat by the window, I had a perfect view of Zenith's main floor. It was chaos. People were standing around looking frustrated, holding phones, pointing at blank screens. Then I saw Richard. He was pacing behind the glass wall of conference room B, the same room where they'd fired me. His face was red, and he was clearly agitated, gesturing wildly at someone on the phone. Every few minutes, he looked toward my empty desk and run his hands through his hair. That's when I saw him. The smirk I'd been carrying all day turned into a full grin.
He was looking for me.
The man who'd sat there yesterday, avoiding eye contact while someone else delivered the news that I was non-essential, was now frantically searching for the woman he'd just fired. My phone rang. Richard's number flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, probably the IT provider trying to reach me. I declined the call and put my phone on silent. Through the window, I watched Richard throw his hands up in frustration. He was probably explaining to whoever was on the phone that they'd fired their IT person that morning. The timing was unfortunate, he'd say. Just a coincidence. My phone lit up with a text from Kelly. Please tell me you have the master password for the email server. Everything's down and nobody can access anything. I typed back. Sorry, I'm no longer with the company. You'll need to contact your managed IT provider. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Kelly was probably staring at her phone, realizing that the quiet girl who'd always fixed everything was no longer there to fix it. Another text, this time from Marcus. Jasmine, I know you're not working here anymore, but we're in crisis mode. The whole system is basically frozen. Can you help us out? Just this once? I finished my latte and watched the sun set behind the Zenith building. The windows were still lit up, people still clustered around computers, still trying to solve a problem they didn't understand. I drove home and ordered Thai food this time. Pad Thai and spring rolls, eaten in comfortable silence while my phone continued to buzz with increasingly desperate messages. At 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Richard standing on my front porch, looking haggard and desperate. He was holding a manila envelope, probably some kind of emergency consulting contract. I opened the door, but left the chain latched. Jasmine, he said, relief flooding his face. Thank God you're home. We need to talk. About what? I asked innocently. The systems. Everything's down. Our IT provider says the infrastructure is fine, but nothing's working. We've got clients calling, deals falling through, payroll stuck in limbo. He held up the envelope. We need your help. Emergency consulting rates, whatever you want. I looked at him through the 2-inch gap in my door. This was the same man who'd avoided eye contact yesterday, who'd let someone else fire me, who'd told me my position was non-essential. I'm sorry, I said, my voice perfectly polite. But I'm no longer with Zenith Dynamics. Your managed IT provider should be able to handle any technical issues. Jasmine, please. I know yesterday was... Have a good evening, Richard. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Through the peephole, I watched him stand there for a full minute before walking back to his car. As he drove away, I saw him on his phone again, probably calling more people, trying to figure out how to fix a problem that had no solution without me. I settled onto my couch with a glass of wine and my laptop. Time to see just how non-essential I really was. I woke up Wednesday morning to 43 missed calls. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. Richard, Kelly, Marcus, numbers I didn't recognize, and 3 calls from someone listed as Zenith Legal. I made coffee and scrolled through the voicemails while the chaos unfolded in real time through my speakers. Jasmine, it's Richard. Please call me back immediately. We have a situation. Hi, this is Patricia Wells from corporate. We need to discuss your consulting availability. Jasmine, it's Kelly. I'm literally crying in the bathroom. Nothing works. Nothing. Please help us. The last voicemail was from someone I'd never heard of. Ms. Williams, this is David Chun, Chief Technology Officer. I understand you recently left our organization. We have an urgent technical matter that requires your expertise. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. I almost laughed out loud. David Chun had been CTO for 8 months, and this was the first time he'd ever acknowledged my existence. Now, he was calling me directly. I ignored the calls and drove to the coffee shop across from Zenith. The scene was even more dramatic than yesterday. The parking lot looked like an emergency response zone, 3 IT service vans, 2 rental cars that probably belonged to emergency consultants, and a cluster of executives standing outside the building talking frantically on their phones. Inside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see pure chaos. People weren't just frustrated anymore. They were panicking. Desks were covered with papers as people tried to work without computers. The conference rooms were packed with emergency meetings. I spotted Richard in one room, gesturing wildly at a whiteboard covered in what looked like organizational charts. Then I saw the most beautiful sight of all, a man in an expensive suit standing in the middle of the main floor, looking completely lost. He had the confused expression of someone who'd been promised a simple fix and was discovering that nothing about this situation was simple. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Ms. Williams? This is Derek Morrison from Morrison Tech Solutions. I believe we need to talk. Derek, the same consultant who'd taken credit for my work 4 years ago. The man who'd written case studies about his innovative integration solutions, while I remained invisible in the corner. I'm sorry, who is this? I asked, even though I knew exactly who it was. Derek Morrison. I'm the lead consultant on the Zenith account. I understand you worked on some of their legacy systems. Legacy systems. My masterpiece was now legacy. I did some work there, yes. But I'm no longer with the company. Right, I understand that. But we're dealing with some unusual technical issues, and your name keeps coming up in the system logs. There's something called Ebonroot that seems to be central to their infrastructure, and nobody here knows what it does or how it works. I sipped my coffee and watched him through the window. He was standing right next to my old desk, holding a tablet and looking frustrated. I'm afraid I can't help you, I said. That sounds like something their current IT team should handle. Ms. Williams, I'm going to be direct with you. Every system in this building is essentially non-functional. Email is down, file servers are inaccessible, their CRM is locked out, and even basic things like badge access are glitching. My team has been here for 18 hours, and we can't find anything wrong with the hardware or network infrastructure. Everything should be working, but nothing is. Through the window, I watched a group of people clustered around the coffee machine, the same one I'd fixed on Monday morning. It was displaying an error code again. That does sound frustrating, I said. Here's the thing, every error log, every access attempt, every system query is being filtered through something called Ebonroot. But it's not in any of their documentation. It's not in any of their system maps. As far as we can tell, it doesn't officially exist, but it's controlling everything. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Have you tried turning it off and on again? I asked sweetly. There was a long pause. Ms. Williams, I've been in this business for 15 years. I've handled integrations for Fortune 100 companies. I've never seen architecture like this. It's like someone built a shadow system that controls everything from behind the scenes. Sounds like you need a very talented architect, I said. We need the architect, the one who built this system. And according to our research, that person is you. I finished my coffee and stood up. Through the window, I could see Richard pacing again, his phone pressed to his ear. David Chun was pointing at various computer screens while a technician shook his head helplessly. Mr. Morrison, I said, walking toward my car. I was fired on Tuesday for having a non-essential role. I'm sure your team can figure it out. You're the experts after all. Wait, please don't hang up. What would it take to get you to consult on this? Name your price. I got into my car and started the engine. I'm not interested in consulting, but you might want to check who owns the licensing for that Ebenroot system you're so curious about. That information should be in your legal department's files. I hung up and drove home. By the time I got back to my apartment, the story was already hitting tech blogs. Major corporation crippled by mysterious system failure. When IT infrastructure attacks, a cautionary tale. The ghost in the machine. How one system brought down a Fortune 500 company. None of the articles mentioned my name, of course. I was still invisible, even in my moment of triumph. But that was about to change. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized from yesterday's termination meeting. Patricia Wells from Corporate Restructuring. I answered on the fourth ring. Ms. Williams, she said, her voice notably different from our meeting yesterday. Gone was the confident corporate authority. Now she sounded desperate. I think we need to talk. About what? I asked, settling into my favorite chair. About coming back. About fixing this situation. About making sure this never happens again. I smiled. I'm listening. We need to meet, Patricia said, her voice carefully controlled, but I could hear the tremor underneath. Can you come in this afternoon? I looked out my window at the sunny Wednesday afternoon, then at my comfortable apartment where I was sitting in pajamas, completely relaxed for the first time in years. I'm sorry, but I don't work there anymore. Remember? Non-essential role. I let that hang in the air for a moment. But I suppose I could make time for a consulting call. Of course. What's your consulting rate? I'd never had a consulting rate. I'd been a salaried employee making $65,000 a year. Decent money, but nowhere near what the people taking credit for my work were earning. $500 an hour, I said, pulling the number out of thin air. 4-hour minimum. There was a pause. That's fine. Can you come in at 2 p.m.? I prefer video calls for initial consultations. More efficient. Another pause. Patricia was clearly not used to people dictating terms to her. Very well. I'll send you a meeting link. At exactly 2 p.m., I joined the video call. My laptop showed a conference room full of people I recognized and several I didn't. Patricia sat at the head of the table, flanked by David Chun and a woman in a sharp suit who was probably from legal. Richard was there too, looking like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Ms. Williams, Patricia began. Thank you for joining us. As you know, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Through the window behind them, I could see people standing around looking frustrated, exactly like yesterday. I heard something about that, I said neutrally. How can I help? David Chun leaned forward. Our entire infrastructure is non-functional. Every system depends on something called Ebenroot, but we can't access it, modify it, or understand how it works. Our IT providers are completely stumped. Ebenroot, I repeated thoughtfully. That does sound familiar. The legal woman spoke up. Ms. Williams, we've done some research. It appears that this system is registered under your personal development account. Is that correct? It is. The room went very quiet. I could see people exchanging glances, probably realizing for the first time that their entire company was running on a system owned by the woman they'd fired 2 days ago. Could you explain how that came to be? The legal woman continued. I leaned back in my chair. 4 years ago, during the Clearwater merger, your systems were completely incompatible. Your consultant said integration was impossible. So I built a middleware solution in my spare time, using my own resources to save the company from losing a $40 million deal. Since I developed it independently, the intellectual property belongs to me. More glances around the room. Richard looked like he was going to be sick. At the time, I continued, I assumed someone would eventually ask about transferring ownership once the crisis was over. But no one ever did. In fact, no one ever acknowledged that I'd built anything at all. David Chin ran his hands through his hair. So, you own the system that runs our entire company? According to the licensing agreements and development records, yes. Patricia cleared her throat. What would it take to resolve this situation? I'd been thinking about this question since yesterday. Not just about money, though that was part of it. I'd been thinking about 7 years of being invisible, overlooked, undervalued. 7 years of watching other people take credit for my work while I sat in the corner, silent and invisible. Well, I said slowly, there are several issues to address. First, there's the immediate technical problem. Second, there's the long-term licensing and ownership question. And third, there's the matter of my termination. What are you proposing? The legal woman asked. For the immediate technical support to restore your systems, my consulting rate is $500 an hour. Given the complexity of the situation, I estimate it will take approximately 40 hours to fully document and stabilize everything. That was $20,000, more than my monthly salary. For the licensing, I continued, I'm willing to transfer ownership of the Ebenroot system to Zenith Dynamics for fair market value. Based on what this system has saved you in consulting fees and integration costs over 4 years, I'd estimate its value at approximately $2 million. Someone in the background made a choking sound. And regarding my termination, I said, looking directly at Richard through the camera, I'll need a formal public apology acknowledging my contributions to the company's success, reinstatement of my position at an appropriate level, senior systems architect seems fitting, with a salary adjustment to reflect my actual value to the organization. What kind of salary adjustment? Patricia asked weakly. I thought about Derek Morrison, who'd probably made more in consulting fees yesterday than I'd made all last year. $150,000 annually. The room was silent. I could see Patricia doing math in her head, probably calculating that even at my new salary, it would cost them less to keep me than to hire consultants to rebuild everything from scratch. And if we don't agree to these terms? David Chin asked. I smiled. Then you can continue trying to run a Fortune 500 company without functional computers. I hear paper filing systems are making a comeback. Patricia looked around the room, then back at the camera. We'll need to discuss this internally and get back to you. Of course, I said. Take all the time you need. But keep in mind that every hour your systems are down is costing you significantly more than my consulting rate. I ended the call and made myself a sandwich. My phone rang 30 minutes later. Ms. Williams. It was Patricia. We'd like to move forward with your proposal. All of it. All of it. I smiled and opened my laptop. Time to go back to work. 6 months later, I was standing in the same conference room where they'd fired me, but everything had changed. The nameplate on the door now read Jasmine Williams, Senior Systems Architect. The corner office with the view of downtown was mine. And the 20-person team reporting to me was implementing the next phase of what the tech press had dubbed the Ebenroot Revolution. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been swift enough to make headlines. Within a week of our negotiation, I'd restored full functionality to Zenith systems and begun the massive project of documenting everything I'd built over the years. What we discovered was staggering. Ebenroot wasn't just running their basic operations. Over 4 years, it had evolved into the backbone of virtually every process in the company. Customer relationship management, financial reporting, supply chain logistics, even building security and employee badge access. Everything flowed through systems I'd created, improved, or optimized. When the full audit was complete, we realized that I hadn't just built a middleware solution. I'd accidentally architected the nervous system of an entire corporation. The media loved the story. The invisible engineer who held the keys to the kingdom ran in TechCrunch. Wired did a feature called How One Woman's Side Project Became Corporate Infrastructure. Forbes interviewed me for their Power Players series. But the real satisfaction came from the smaller, daily victories. Richard no longer worked at Zenith. The official reason was restructuring, but everyone knew he'd been quietly pushed out after the investigation into how such a critical employee had been classified as non-essential. His replacement, Maria Santos, was a former engineer who understood the technical side of the business and treated her team like humans instead of replaceable cogs. Derek Morrison from Morrison Tech Solutions had called me 3 times, trying to pitch collaboration opportunities. I declined politely each time, but word had gotten around the consulting world about what had happened at Zenith. His firm's reputation for miracle integrations had taken a significant hit when it became public knowledge that their previous success stories had actually been built by an underpaid employee working in secret. The best part, though, was watching my team work. I'd hired 12 new engineers, most of them women and people of color who'd been overlooked by other companies. We were building something unprecedented, a completely transparent, well-documented, scalable architecture that could serve as a model for other organizations. Patricia Wells from Corporate Restructuring had left the company shortly after our negotiation. Her replacement, Dr. Jennifer Kim, had implemented new policies ensuring that technical contributors were properly recognized and compensated. The days of invisible architects were over, at least at Zenith. My assistant knocked on my office door. "Ms. Williams, your 3 p.m. is here." I looked up from my monitor, where I was reviewing the architecture plans for our expansion into European markets. "Send them in." The door opened, and a young black woman in her early 20s walked in, looking nervous but determined. She reminded me of myself 7 years ago, brilliant, eager, and probably used to being underestimated. "Ms. Williams, I'm Ashley Chun. I'm here for the junior developer interview." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please call me Jasmine. Tell me about your background." For the next hour, we talked about her projects, her ideas, and her experiences. She'd graduated top of her class from MIT but had been passed over by several companies for candidates with better cultural fit. I recognized the coded language immediately. "Ashley," I said as our conversation wound down, "what do you know about systems architecture?" Her eyes lit up. "Everything I can learn. I've been studying the Ebenroot papers you published. The way you handled real-time data translation between legacy systems is incredible. I've been working on a similar problem for my senior thesis." I smiled. "How would you feel about working on the next generation of that system?" 6 weeks later, Ashley was leading a team of 3 other junior developers on a project that would revolutionize how companies handled data migration. I made sure her name was on every patent filing, every research paper, every presentation to the board. The phone on my desk buzzed. "Jasmine, you have a call from someone at Microsoft. They want to discuss licensing Ebenroot technology for their enterprise division." Microsoft. Google had called last month. Amazon the month before that. The system I'd built in desperation during a corporate crisis had become the gold standard for enterprise integration. But the best call had come 3 months ago from my old manager at the community college where I taught weekend programming classes before Zenith. They wanted to offer me an adjunct professorship, teaching a course called Ethical Systems Architecture to the next generation of engineers. I'd said yes immediately. Every Saturday morning, I stood in front of 20 students and told them the story of Ebenroot. Not just the technical details, but the human story. How to advocate for themselves. How to document their contributions. How to ensure they never became invisible. Remember, I told them in last week's class, the people who build the systems that run the world should never be considered non-essential. Because when you control the infrastructure, you control everything. One student raised her hand. "Professor Williams, what happened to the manager who fired you?" I smiled, thinking of Richard's LinkedIn profile, which still showed him as seeking new opportunities 6 months later. He learned that when you underestimate the quiet person in the corner, sometimes you lose everything. The class laughed, and I continued the lesson. Outside my office window, the city hummed with digital life. Millions of transactions, communications, and connections flowing through systems built by people like me. People who deserved recognition, respect, and proper compensation for keeping the modern world running. I was no longer invisible, and I was making sure the next generation wouldn't be either. The revolution had begun with a single line of code and a woman who refused to stay quiet. And this was just the beginning.